not at all. And I should say that for almost the entirety of the Kosovo War in 1999 and 1998, and then later in 2000, and I was on assignment for the New York Times, but I was never a full-time employee. So I don't want anyone to think, yes, I was a freelancer. And if any of you are journalism students or young journalists, you probably already know that it doesn't matter if you're here in Kosova or if you're in New York or anywhere, it is equally difficult, right? And it only will be more so. That being said, I think you all have a lot more freedom than we had. We maybe had a little bit more reliable assignments, and we could be sure that our work would be seen by large numbers of the public, but we maybe had a little less freedom. So anyway, that's a little bit about journalism. A note. This is probably one of the places I've been that has changed the absolute most. I think I can say that. Some other places, Sarajevo doesn't, of course it has changed, but not like Pristina and Kosovo. Ljubljana hasn't changed at all. It was always a sleepy Austrian town, and it is again. And so, yeah, it is very humbling to realize that so much time can pass so quickly. One moment you're a young person, and the next moment you're, one of these washed up nobodies. and it's very humbling, right? It really is very humbling, because I was the age most of you are now when I was first here. I was first here in 1997, and so I was 26 at that time. So it was another life.
How did the 26-year-old just come here? What led you to come here?
So I, like a lot of people, I was a student. I was always interested in photography. I'll show some pictures to answer that question, actually. So these are actually some photographs of my family. That's me, twice, okay, as in the winter and then in the summer. And this is a double exposure on a roll of film. It's not the kind of mistake or accident you can make digitally, but with film cameras, of course, this was a mistake that my father made, but I kind of love it, especially now, so long. So my dad, despite this mistake, was actually a very good amateur photographer. And I was actually the first member of my family born in the United States. Many of you probably have family members abroad, all across Europe and the world. And in the Chinese community, especially my part of China and South China, it's a very similar story. For over 100 years, our people have been emigrating, and we have a very large diaspora. And so this is my great uncle. He was the brother of my grandfather, and he was, this is in Cuba, because before Cuba was a communist country, it was a kind of semi-American colony, and my great uncle was able to get to Cuba, and this picture is from the 1920s. So this picture is almost 100 years old. It's the oldest picture in my family. And so when you're growing up as a little boy in New York, and you're American, but you're also Chinese, right? And then you have these photographs in these albums. And I was always looking at these photographs. These are my parents. My parents got married when they were 19 and 17, very young. And this is my father in the front and my mother in the back, and he's about to get on that airplane to America, and they were about to not see each other for 19 years. They were separated for 19 years while my mother was still in Hong Kong and my father was in the United States. When I was growing up, I did not think this was unusual, because maybe for some Kosovar families also, and indeed, people get separated for long periods. Here, maybe it's a little easier because, it's easier, especially now with the open visa. You can get on a plane or train or bus to Berlin or Rome, or it's much easier for you guys. You're lucky that way. Back then, it was almost, this was a journey you made at most twice in a lifetime. For many people, only once in a lifetime. And this, for example, this is the only picture I have of my two grandmothers together. On the bottom left is my mother's mother, who actually lived in what the country today called Malaysia. Back then, it was the British colony of Malaya. On the right is my father's mother, who I actually grew up with in New York. But this was the only time that they, well, it's one of like the 3 times that they met. And this picture is 1967. And you notice the cracks. That's because I have the original negative from the photo studio. And originally I was going to fix it with Photoshop because you can do wonders, and especially with AI now. Like you just click a button and it looks perfect. But I decided not to do that. I decided, actually, you know what, I'm going to show it to you, showing how it's deteriorated and become old. Another picture of that my father made, you see he was there's a wedding in Chinatown in New York in the 1980s. So you see he was very talented, and he was never able to be professional because he did not speak English very well. And, you know, in America, he was, unfortunately, had to mostly work these kind of low-paid jobs. And so even though he was a very talented photographer, he was not able to compete, you know, with people that were educated in America. But he was very talented, and he taught me everything that I know. And so when I was 18 years old, we actually went to China for the very first time. By the way, feel free to interrupt me because I'm just telling the story of how I came to photography and to journalism. And you know, feel free to just raise your hand at any time. I don't really want to be the only one talking here. So when I was 18 years old, it was 1989, and 1989 was a very important year here. As you know, well, you're saying people are not studying too much of the modern history, but if you are, you know that 1989 was a very important year here in Kosova, as it was in China. There was a student movement for greater democracy, greater openness, and this is the famous statue of democracy they built. And the day after I made this picture in June 1989, the Chinese army came in and killed several thousand people and crushed this movement, crushed the democracy movement. And to this day in China, you can't really talk about this. You know, if you talk about this, the police and the government gets very upset. It's become part of the erased history of China. But for me, I was just 18 years old, and it turned out to be the first pictures I ever published and sold to the Reuters news agency. And so these are some of the students during that sit-in protest in Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing. Talk about another life. This is even more another life than Kosova, because I was 18, let alone 26, right? Just unbelievable. I look at these and I think it's other people's pictures. They look like pictures you find in an old book, right?
And you took these photos?
Yeah, I took every picture you're looking at. Well, the ones from my family, but now every picture you're looking at, I took, yes. Yeah. Starting with the statue.
Okay.
And this is, you guys probably know the famous picture. It's called the Tank Man, where there's one Chinese protester facing, and for a minute he actually stopped this whole row of tanks coming right at him. It's the most famous picture from Tiananmen in June of 1989. So of course I did not make that picture. If I had made that picture, I really would be famous. But this is exactly where it happened. So it's kind of like you realize later, oh my God, that's a famous picture, and I was, you know, 20 meters away, right? Kind of crazy.
What led you to go to China?
So my parents wanted, they had come, as you saw, my parents had come to America, and they had never gone back in all those years. They were stuck working these kind of, you know, not good jobs, and it was hard to raise a family. It was hard to just survive, you know, and it took them many years to save enough money to go back for what turned out actually to be the only time they ever went back.
But did they choose the dramatic moment?
No, of course not. No. Of course, if they had known that it would be a dramatic moment, they would have said, no, let's go next year, right? No, normal people don't do this. And I think I did realize something in this process. A normal person would say, you know, my God, I better go to law school, medical school. I better do what my parents tell me and become a, you know, get a real job and have a nice life and not be so difficult. But if you have something wrong in your brain and you're young, you actually think, oh wait, I actually really want to do, and I actually was very disappointed. You see, these are okay, they're not great, right? And I took all 4 rows of film in Beijing. 4 rows of film, that's what is it? That's 144 pictures. Can you believe that? These days I would shoot 144 pictures in 10 minutes if a lot is happening, right? So it's kind of, and even in the war in Kosova, usually we would, you know, we would shoot between 2 and 10 rows of film a day, right? Like, or sometimes even more if it was crazy. I remember arriving in Kosova here with, I think, 60 or 80 rolls of film in my bag. and you know, each trip was maybe a few weeks or a month. And many times I would run out, and luckily there were wonderful photography labs here where we were able to buy more film, right? It wasn't digital like now, where the worst thing that happens is your battery is low and you better have remembered your battery. And the train station in Sarajevo, you know, with a kind of skinny cow. And then Kosovo, 1997. So this is that last protest that was nonviolent that the Serbian MUP crushed with great violence. And this is, you can probably recognize where this is, right? These are some of the university guys, I think professors or you know, they were part of that movement.
So this must be in Velani.
Yes.
It's where the protest started.
It's where it started.
Now.
And then, of course, we know what happened. The Serbian police started just beating everybody up without any warning. I forget how many people were beaten, but it was a lot, and it was not, you know, it was pretty bad. So you can see that. And then into the next year, that was 97, 98. So I wasn't here the whole time. I was always going back and forth. There were other things I was doing. In 97, actually, I was coming from Hong Kong, where it was the end of the British rule of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was becoming a Chinese